To carry the children's clothes as well as their own.
Then they opened up our suitcases. They confiscated anything that was made out of metal, spoons, forks, belt buckles, girls had earrings, anything like that.
We were given 3 days to leave San Francisco. We all had to just bring whatever we could carry in 2 suitcases. We had no idea where we were going, and we were on a train and kept asking, where are we going? Everything was so uncertain, and my mother was sure that we were all going to go out to become farm laborers and that we were all going to be shot. We had been brought up on the American dream and American democracy, and it was very difficult for people like us having to take the reality of what was happening to us with all of our ideas as to how Americans were treated. And I think that was psychologically probably the most difficult to deal with.
When they took us to the camp, I looked, and there was a double row of barbed wires with guard towers. And I looked at all that, and I thought to myself, my God, is this happening?
That was really an experience right there. It kind of made me cry when I thought about all those things, because I've never been to Japan, and I didn't know anything about Japanese, but I just happened to have a Japanese face, and I sat down and I said, this is certainly something else for an American citizen.
I was an American. I didn't feel Japanese, but my mother and my father would say to me, how can you be pro-American when they've got us in this prison camp in the desert? And I would say, well, I can't help it. That's what I am. They said, but real Americans aren't locked up. And all I could do was cry.
Then you were given a number of the barrack that you were assigned to. There were 12 barracks to each block. Each block was surrounded by about a 5 or 6 foot ditch. The cots, you got a bag that was filled with straw for a mattress. We were made to go single file, strip, and as you walk through this barrack door, there was an MP on either side that sprayed you with some kind of chemical powder. I don't know whether it was DDT or what it was. By any stretch of the imagination, can you call this a relocation center? How can anyone call it a relocation center? You know, it was a concentration camp, pure and simple. Of course, I know my parents, they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know whether they were going to be shot or deported or what have you. As far as the folks were concerned, they felt that they were already old, had lived a life, and really didn't much care. You know, they were concerned more for the children than anything else. It's kind of a demeaning thing to happen.
I happened to overhear at work that the Japanese were all evacuated into camp. So I did buy a paper on the way back from work, and, you know, I saw the picture, and it sort of made me sick to my stomach, you know, that I felt kind of lonely, you know, like, well, what am I going to do now, you know? I could see my parents going in, you know, and my brothers going into camp, and I'm not there, you know. I felt you know, sort of all alone.
Fred Korematsu was apprehended on May 30th, 1942. This film, produced in the 50s by Columbia University, dramatizes his arrest. He was picked up standing on a street corner in San Leandro. Fred's girlfriend, pressured by her family and intimidated by the FBI, refused to see him again.
I think when Fred decided to evade the internment, to stay in San Leandro, a lot of that, of course, reflected his own wish to stay with his girlfriend. But after he got arrested and he was approached by a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union as a potential test case, decided to go ahead with it, particularly when he was put in the camp awaiting his trial.
As I arrived in camp, I could see the Japanese people in there and the kids and everything, you know. And I said, boy, this is really a miserable place, you know. No heat, there isn't any heat or anything. I mean, it's made for horses, not for human beings, you know. And I just wonder how in the world, you know, the people lived in this long, you know.
And he was under a lot of pressure from other internees. Don't rock the boat. Don't bring down a lot of publicity on us, public hostility. He became more and more firm in his conviction that somebody had to stand up and bring a test case.
Korematsu was tried at the San Francisco District Court. At his arraignment, he was led at gunpoint out of the courtroom and taken to a military prison. Later, he was convicted for violation of the military order, and Fred was placed in the camps along with his family. Both the Hirabayashi and Yasui convictions were appealed to the Supreme Court in... The interned Japanese Americans slowly adjusted to life in the desolate concentration camps. Early in 1943, the U.S. Army announced that a special combat unit comprised of Japanese Americans would be formed. Following his release from prison, Min Yasui campaigned for the internees to show their loyalty by joining the war in Europe. While many joined the 442nd Combat Team, others refused, stating they would not serve the country which had imprisoned them. Resisted the draft and was sentenced to an additional prison term.
I'm from Seattle. After war was declared, I was evacuated from the Pacific coast. When the call came for volunteers for a combat team, I volunteered from a relocation center to show my loyalty and to prove that I had the right to live as a good American citizen. I'm fighting over here for the better things of life and to preserve the American way of living.
In 1943, the War Relocation Authority allowed young adults to leave the camps to work in the Midwest. They were given between $15 and $25 and transportation fare. Most of them worked as farm laborers, defense and factory workers, houseboys, nurses, and maids. By August of 1945, when the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, the camps consisted primarily of children and the elderly. The war was over. More than 40 years have passed. After a long period of silence, the Japanese American community is now reviving the issue of the incarceration.
This evening, our purpose is to commemorate February 19th, the day of historic significance to the Japanese American people. 42 years ago today, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, and set into motion a shameful chapter in recent U.S. history. It's important for us to collectively remember because no other event has had such a profound impact on all generations of Japanese Americans.
I think for many years, the Nisei, or second generation, who are our parents, we are Sansei, which is third generation. I think our parents felt shame or guilt about being involved in the camps. And as a result, they didn't really pass their stories on to their children until I think there was more ethnic consciousness among Asian Americans and Japanese Americans. At that point, I think Sansei became more curious about their, quote, roots, to find out what the history was involved with their parents, who really didn't talk about this very much.
I remember for myself as a Sansei, at first I became very impatient. You know, I said, well, you know, this thing was wrong. You know, I mean, we should do something about it. You know, the government hadn't even made any kind of apology or restitution to the Japanese people. And I think what hurt me most is that I could still see the bitterness and the feeling of guilt and shame. People wanted to just forget about it.
My parents, their friends, my aunts, my uncles, all my relatives, they lost 3.5 years of their lives, but more than that, they lost their dignity. My father said in 1979 that it took him 39 years to say, I was ripped off. He held that inside of him for 39 years. A part of their life, a part of their incarceration is my incarceration also. As a Sansei, although we weren't incarcerated, we still felt the fallout from their imprisonment, and we continue to today.
The effects, the impact that it had on our parents affected how we were brought up, you know, feeling, not knowing our history or culture, and feeling that we had to be ashamed of it.
In the late 70s, the two generations, the Nisei and their children, the Sansei, joined together in calling for monetary compensation or redress for hardships and losses suffered as a result of the internment. In 1980, a presidential commission was established to review the internment and its impact. In 1982, a group of mostly Japanese American attorneys, along with Peter Irons, discovered new evidence leading them to a rarely used legal option, a writ of error coram nobis, which would make it possible to reopen the wartime cases of Fred Korematsu, Min Yasui, and Gordon Hirabayashi. The attorneys are seeking to overturn the convictions and dismiss the indictments of the three men.
I kind of think we have to decide, given this timeline, because I think if we're going to make an argument that she should overturn the constitutionality, that we're actually going to have to put a little bit of the argument that we developed over the summer in a very, very condensed form into the P's and A's.
In the government's motion, they don't expressly say anything about governmental or prosecutorial misconduct, and they don't specifically say anything about unconstitutionality or a grave mistake being made.
The legal team, including Lorraine Banai, charged that high government officials knowingly lied to the Supreme Court and committed acts of misconduct by suppressing, altering, and destroying key evidence in the three cases which upheld the legality of the internment. On January 19, 1983, the coram nobis team officially announced the reopening of all three cases. Fred Korematsu's would be the first to be heard.
It's made an immense difference.
We're going to try to get an emergency letter out this week.
They broached us with the idea of possibly accepting a pardon. as lawyers have to do, we took it back to our clients. Fred Korematsu told me, he said, we shouldn't accept a pardon. If anything, we should pardon the government.
We'll suggest to Judge Patel, yes, we do want findings. We want a comment, a judicial comment, some kind of government comment on the evidence that we presented.
Let's fill that courtroom.
Petitioner is Fred Korematsu, spelled K-O-R-E-M-A-T-S-U. He refused to obey the evacuation orders leading up to the internment of over 110,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. He was convicted in 1942. His case was reviewed in the Supreme Court in 1944, and the Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, upheld the legality of the evacuation program. That case has stood for 40 years, and it has commonly been referred to by constitutional law experts as a civil liberties disaster.
The documentation in our petition, filed in federal court last January, included evidence from the government's own files that government lawyers had intentionally destroyed and altered and suppressed evidence in these cases, had withheld from the Supreme Court crucial evidence regarding the loyalty of Japanese Americans, attesting to the fact that Japanese Americans were overwhelmingly loyal as a group. Government lawyers also presented to the court false evidence regarding the commission by Japanese Americans of acts of espionage, acts that the government knew to be false, but the government intentionally withheld the evidence proving the falsity of these charges from the Supreme Court.
Again, Peter Irons.
The government's response in these cases, essentially the argument that we should let bygones be bygones, put this unfortunate episode behind us, as they put it, I think is simply an evasion of the issues raised in the petition about the suppression of evidence, the lack of any real evidence that Japanese Americans constituted a danger to the country. The government doesn't want to confront these issues, partly because it knows that the petition is based on its own files. The government's own lawyers made these charges, not the petitioners. So for the government to deal directly with them would require them to admit the facts in the petition, which are incontestable in terms of the evidence they're based on. And secondly, the government, I think, as a political issue, is afraid of raising or reopening these issues for political reasons. It has a desire to portray itself as being sympathetic to minorities, a position which many people disagree with.
Roger Daniels.
Well, certainly McCloy and Bendetson, the surviving architects of the relocation, view all of these things as an attempt to besmirch their own patriotism, their own devotion. McCloy called the commission redress hearing an outrage, and I'm sure that he finds the Coram Nobis suits an outrage. I'm sure he will finds what I say an outrage. The fact is that an outrageous thing was done to a people for no good reason, and we like to say in this country, I'm not sure as a historian it's always true, but we like to say in this country that democracy corrects its own mistakes. In this case, it's taken more than 40 years, but at least it now seems that a corrective process is underfoot. That certainly is all to the good. It would have been better had it been sooner. It would have been better had there been nothing to correct. But at least it is something.
San Francisco attorney Dale Minami.
I think one of the most interesting surprises for me, one that I'm still trying to sort out, is the reception we received from the Nisei community when we went to give talks. I'd go with Fred or Min or Gordon, and we'd give a talk to a community, let's say in Gardena, where I grew up. And this happened everywhere we went, is that the Nisei people would come up men and women. They'd cry, they would thank us, they'd shake our hands. And I think what I realized from that is that what they had gone through had been suppressed or repressed for years and years and years. And I think only now, when people can openly talk about it and openly relate their feelings, did I begin to learn what a serious and I guess real deep effect the camp experience had on the Nisei. I think for them to come up and I would openly cry really indicated to me that the resistance by Fred and Gordon and Min took on a symbolic meaning to the Nisei, and it represented, I think, to a great degree, their aspirations. I think everybody now, looking back, would like to have resisted to a much greater degree than they were able to.
Oh, I see. It was temporary holding.
Yeah.
Section, so.
Yeah. Okay. This one, you're looking at the camera. Okay. Good.
Min Yasui now resides in Denver, Colorado with his wife, True. He works with the Japanese American Citizens League, which, along with the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations and the National Council for Japanese American Redress, have introduced legislation and brought suit against the government for monetary compensation for former internees.
Even if we are successful in this case, it won't erase the agony of the people or the frustrations that were endured by 120,000 people. The significance of this case simply is it is always brought out that the United States Supreme Court did sustain the constitutionality of evacuation. But if we undercut the grounds on which those particular cases were based, it seems to me that no one thereafter can say that evacuation or military orders were constitutional or valid.
And hold 1, 2, 3, good.
Gordon Hirabayashi lives in Edmonton, Canada. He's a professor of sociology at the University of Alberta. He continues to work with the American Friends Service Committee and is active in the Japanese-Canadian community.
Well, it was an opportunity that we've been waiting for. I'd never given up that someday we may have a reversal, because it felt so diabolically wrong. But I didn't know exactly how a review could come. So when Peter Irons came over and told us that there is evidence of suppression of information from the courts, that's all I needed to hear. I was ready to go. I feel gratified that we have had the opportunity, even after over 40 years, to get a hearing on this and possibly a solution that will secure citizens' freedom, citizens' rights for all people, not just us. You know, I've served my sentence. I'm not going to get much out of this personally, but I'd like to use this opportunity to make it a little more difficult for deviations in the future.
Good, and hold 1. Nice. That's good, and hold.
Fred Korematsu returned to San Leandro, where he lives with his wife, Catherine. After the war, he was unable to obtain federal or state employment because of his conviction. Before the 1983 Coram Nobis petition, he refused to talk about his case in public.
It took me 40 years, but I still remember when I was shackled and put in prison for being a Japanese. Being an American citizen didn't mean a thing. I can't express the feeling that I had at that time. So that's been in me for all these years to try to correct it.
Just to even say, government, you did something wrong, and have it answer anything, you feel like you've got some kind of effect. After 40 years of silence on Fred's part. And Fred hasn't talked about the issue in 40 years.
On November 10th, 1983, Fred Korematsu had his day in court. Judge Marilyn Hall Patel granted the petition in Korematsu versus United States, which overturned his 40-year-old conviction and marked the first time the American legal system has repudiated the Supreme Court's stand on the incarceration. The attorneys announced that if the Justice Department appeals the Korematsu decision as expected, they would continue to fight until the case is completely cleared. The Yasui and Hirabayashi cases are expected to follow the same course.
The government's action in conceding this case is consistent with the unequivocal findings of the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians that no military necessity ever existed for the exclusion and detention of Japanese Americans during World War II. I think their capitulation is not an act of graciousness or generosity, but a recognition that the wrongs done to Fred Korematsu and to the Japanese American people was politically, legally, and morally indefensible. They have lived with this decision for over 40 years with the knowledge that the decision was wrong, that the exclusion was wrong, and that the detention was wrong. For the Japanese American community, this is a long overdue victory.
I think it's a great victory. I think Japanese Americans view these cases as trials that they never had. And I think while Fred feels naturally vindicated for all he went through, I think Japanese Americans who experience the same thing have to feel some degree of vindication as well.
It's been 40 years, and many of us Niseis who were intimidated by the establishment, so to speak, felt there was a vindication today that indeed we were wrongfully incarcerated, and I'm terribly, terribly appreciative of what the Sanseis have done. They're the ones that took the whole thrust of the situation and carried it through. And we sit here so congratulating ourselves for what happened today. I'm really happy for Fred Korematsu. We owe him a lot. The Japanese community really owes him a lot.